All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. Looks like it's 11:02 and we've kind of stopped having folks trickle in. So yay, so happy to have you here. Really grateful for the time that you all are taking out of your days to join us again. I know that we're really grateful and excited to share this work with you and circle back and get your feedback today. And just a quick reminder that you are all here because you participated in the collaborative capacity study that Seamus and myself, my name is Jamie, if you don't remember, have been working on for almost exactly 51 weeks. So we're almost 1 year old in this research study. And we have been working away at our data analysis, putting together our results and findings, and we've put together a presentation to share with you today, and also give some time for feedback. So you may notice that you don't see other people in this forum. We have designed this webinar to be anonymous because that's what we committed to in this research project. So as you will notice that the chat has been disabled, but you are able to connect with us as hosts and panelists via the Q&A screen. And then we'll also have a Jamboard link that we'll be interacting with you all and asking for some feedback and questions on our results and findings in just a little bit. So to give you a roadmap of where we're headed today, I'm going to put the agenda in the chat, and so you should see that shortly. So just to take a big step back, I first wanted to just acknowledge that this research project was supported and continues to be supported by the Stewardship Network. So we have Rob here today, who's going to give us a quick, brief overview of the Stewardship Network and what they do and how they've supported this project. Our project has also been supported by the California Landscape Stewardship Network, which is closely linked with the Stewardship Network, and was funded by the Resources Legacy Fund. So we are excited to hear from Rob in just a minute. So that's going to be the first part of this webinar. Then Seamus and I are going to give you our brief presentation of our research results and some of our recommendations. And then, as I mentioned, we have about 10 to 15 minutes for your feedback using an anonymous Jamboard platform. And if you've not used it before, we'll make sure that we go over the instructions and give you some details on how to use that. And then we'll share some of our next steps, ways that we're going to incorporate your feedback and give a little closing. Seamus and I are going to share some of our aha moments and takeaways from this research. So I think without further ado, I think I might pass it over to Rob to give us an intro to the Stewardship Network.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. So again, my name is Rob Luzinski, and I'm with the Stewardship Network, and my role is community coordinator at the Stewardship Network. So largely my role consists of supporting what we call our member communities. So we have over 20 place-based member communities that range from within the Great Lakes to beyond in California. We've also expanded to the East Coast. And what we do is help these collaboratives do more on the ground by supporting them with some of the services and needs that they have outside of conservation on the ground. And so we're doing things like CRM support services, we're doing technology services, we serve as a fiduciary for several of these groups, and generally just providing support in whatever way they need, networking opportunities, professional development opportunities. And this work is, with this amazing research project, is an extension of that in terms of supporting from a technology standpoint, but then also as a fiduciary and kind of helping to manage just the, contracting and things like that. And also, of course, the Stewardship Network, we have a vested interest in the findings of this type of research because we do really care about it and we're really interested in the results. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with both Jamie and Seamus. And so I will just give you I'll share my screen for just a quick moment. So forgive me. And then you're going to see the whole meta thing real quick. And then I'm going to go to slideshow. All right. So are you seeing my screen now? Excellent. So then a little bit about us at the Stewardship Network. I kind of started with this, but TSN is a 501c3 nonprofit organization with an award-winning 20-year history. We're now serving 20 place-based member communities from the Great Lakes to the Pacific Ocean. And we also, just one of the many things that we do as a network is we host TSN webcasts, and they happen the second Wednesday of each month at the Eastern Time Zone's noon hour. I'd like to go, so our mission is to connect, equip, and mobilize people and organizations to care for land and water in their communities. So I wanted to talk briefly about the Spring Challenge. We just got done with that, and I had to brag a little bit because we were really proud of how that program went. So the Spring Challenge being one of our flagship programs at the Stewardship Network. So throughout the years, it was built to increase the impact and awareness of collaborative stewardship activities, formerly the Garlic Mustard Challenge and Spring Invasive Species Challenge. And the work is happening, but Spring Challenge asks us to unite and do more together. So it's basically an awareness campaign trying to collect all of the great stewardship work that folks are doing and to spread that around the world. We had an increased focus in 2023 in terms of the different categories that we were accepting. And we also had a donation campaign that was a part of this project. Those were matched one-to-one by a generous donor. And our Spring Challenge results, 2022, we had 36,735. And this year we had 50,817. So it was an excellent year. Thank you so much to everyone that participated. And you see a little graphic there comparing the two, a mix of all the different categories that were submitted. And in 22, we had the most participants we've ever recorded at 7,133. And in 2023, we had 13,604. And so we're just so very excited about the work with the Spring Challenge and all of the great contributions that all the organizations that support the Stewardship Network made. And once again, really the point of that program is kind of represents in a way our ethos around, collaborative stewardship, is that we're all in this together. We're trying to make it so that there are not as many barriers between collaboration for different partners and stakeholders. And we're trying to overall elevate the stories and the successes that we're all experiencing for the sake of bringing it more to the public attention and also to people that can support us with funding and other things. And so I really appreciate you all giving me the time to speak. And now I will jump into the background and just provide tech support as needed. So thank you again, everybody, and looking forward to a great session with you all.
Thanks so much, Rob, for giving us that context and kind of grounding us research in the larger context of the Stewardship Network, and great work that you all are doing. So I think we're going to transition here now. And for those of you who are just joining, welcome. We gave a little bit of an intro and some logistics in the beginning, but you may recognize that you are anonymous right now as committed by our research protocol and projects. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A. That'll just come to Seamus, myself, and Rob, but the chat has been disabled. So any questions or comments, feel free to just toss those in the Q&A and we'll see those and address those. But I think we'll go ahead and get started on our portion of today to make use of time. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And just kick us off. So we, as I mentioned at the beginning, have been working on this project for almost a year now. We are still working on our title, I think, every day, trying to figure out the best project title for this. But really our focus was around collaborative capacity, as we shared with you in our interviews and in our focus groups, really trying to amplify practitioner perspectives, linking investments to outcomes. And today, we're going to talk to you a little bit about the lineage of this work. So really diving into the academic frameworks and some of the practitioner frameworks and just really sharing some of the background literature that we saw in this work. We'll give you a brief rundown of our research methods, which you know well since you were so intimately involved. We'll then go ahead and share some of our findings with you, as well as some recommendations and next steps. So with that, I'll pass it over to Seamus.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. And so good to have you all here. We're really excited to share some of our findings, but we're going to start with this lineage because I think this is really how we walked into the work. I think a big part of this is just this dynamic, transformative, interdisciplinary big work is just a little bit unruly and can be hard to tell one story, which is in part the strength of the field. That's kind of the strength of the growth of collaborative processes. But we also thought it was really important to recognize kind of where we're coming from. What are the contributions that we're pulling from? And also, what are those assumptions that are baked in, and as they get mixed, how can we better recognize those? So from the different points, different lineages we're tracking, we have this collaborative governance piece, recognizing that this is largely being defined these days as a Western governance approaches, but there's also these threads of non-Western, indigenous worldviews and approaches that are woven into a lot of the origins of this kind of work. In the literature, it shows up as collaborative governance, which draws its origins from conflict resolution and stakeholder engagement, but increasingly it's being used to address these complex issues across political boundaries, sectors, and scales. These huge wicked problems that we're seeing in the world, and it's also dovetailing with landscape stewardship, and which has its origins in the transboundary science, migration ecology, watershed management, which has been done for quite a number of years, but it's being kind of pulled together under this framework of landscape stewardship, using that scale of relevance for both social and ecological systems and processes. And that's that stewardship piece, integrating humans as part of that ecological story. So those are kind of the two threads of the literature that we're pulling together, but we're also seeing that the academic literature has lagged behind the practitioner community in all of this. And that's largely why we turn to you all for our findings, for our data. And the practitioner community has seen a variety of innovations and accomplishments over the decades. But at the same time, there's this recognition that there are also key gaps in investment in the collaborative processes, the capacity, as we're phrasing it. And so we thought we were, brought this study as a way to kind of support the practitioner community in finding and identifying those gaps, and also finding ways to fill them. But we did also look at these emerging frameworks that practitioners and academics have been working on together. At first, we looked at the California Landscape Stewardship Network's practitioner framework. There are a variety of frameworks out there, but the CLSA framework adapted very recently a traditional nonprofit organizational capacity framework by McKinsey & Company, widely used, widely recognized, into a collaborative capacity framework, trying to identify the distinction between organizations and collaboratives. And you can see here that these building blocks, these capacity elements, are very similar, but they more appropriately reflect the collaboratives. So here you can see that there's these elements that have these binding, the mortar is sort of the binding binding elements rather of the inclusive culture, meaningful relationships. And that was meant to be identifiable, legible to funders, so that they could see that there's these fundable elements that collaboratives could use. And so we had this framework to start, but we really wanted to turn to the community at large. And so that's the origin of this study. And so we turned and looked out at the collaborative practitioners and experts in the field.
Yeah, so this will probably be a bit of a reminder for many of you. So we'll try not to belabor the research methods too much, but just as a reminder, we really took a qualitative exploratory approach to this research. And as Seamus was just saying, we really wanted to turn our attention to practitioners, those who are working in collaboratives, those who have worked in collaboratives and who are now kind of maybe situated a little bit further away from on the ground, but still very involved and have great expertise in this work. And we also worked with funders, state, federal, and private funders to really gain perspectives on collaborative capacity. Really trying to understand those elements and activities involved, but also the outcomes that come from investments in those elements. And so just briefly wanted to acknowledge that we had an advisory team of 6 people, plus Sharon Farrell and Sean Johnson, who kind of aided as our planning team. All of these folks contributed many ideas and feedback related to our research design, as well as are currently providing feedback on some of our results and findings in our eventual white paper. So just wanted to acknowledge their great work and support for this. And as a reminder, these are our research questions. So we were asking, how do collaborative stewardship practitioners in the US define and describe collaborative capacity and its elements? Also, we were interested in what does increased collaborative capacity allow practitioners to actually do? So really thinking about the implementation and action aspects. And then on the flip side, without capacity, what are practitioners unable to do? So with those questions, we did a thorough lit review, which Seamus kind of went over already. We then turned to you all and led, excuse me, about 27 semi-structured interviews. And this was with US-based collaboratives doing a variety of things. So anything from forestry to a more rural landscape conservation. We really took a broad definition to collaborative landscape stewardship and looked at many different places across the US. We found, and when we did a little bit of stats of who we actually ended up speaking with, we had a pretty fairly distributed group of folks from different parts of the country. So that was really exciting and interesting for us to see. We also led 3 focus groups with 16 individual, public, and private funders. After doing all those interviews and focus groups, we took all of that great data, those transcripts, we edited those, and we spent probably 2 solid months, the 2 of us, doing some qualitative thematic analysis through open coding. We did that together, and so we read through all of the transcripts, all of the great conversations that we had with all of you several times, and coded that to get the themes that we're sharing with you today.
So what did we find with all that work? So in coding these interviews, we saw sort of a logic emerge. That was a large part of this that I want to bring up front. You know, even recognizing, and you can go to the next slide here, Jamie, recognizing the non-linearity, there's this sort of conceptual logic model that underpins a lot of what we're talking about today. And that's elements enable activities which allow collaboratives to achieve their outcomes, which we'll get into as we go through these findings. But we have this, you know, in a way, a laundry list of elements. Those are the pieces that go into collaboratives. These are the collaborative capacity elements. And what you're seeing here is a summarized list. Each of these has a lot of sub-themes, but, you know, things like physical infrastructure came to the surface. That's internet, that's convening spaces, roads, you know, the governance structures of the collaboratives. Those are the decision-making structures, the committees, the things that go into how a collaborative goes about its business. We also had this really robust category of participant qualities, and that's anything from care to commitment, patience, and just the collaborative mindset that we all know is so critical to this kind of work. And just going along here, coordination capacity also emerged as a kind of a bulky category, but we put a lot of stuff in there, and that includes a lot of the staff and the people power of the collaborative. So that's the coordinators, the grant writers, you know, the funders. Those are the kind of staff pieces that were also super foundational to collaboratives. And we have context here in bold. We'll get back around to that because that's sort of another large and in the end somewhat you know, hard to distinguish the context from a lot of this work. We're going to try to discuss that a little bit further as this goes. So we have this, you know, long list of elements, and we really think that there's a lot of value in just recognizing. That speaks to our first research question: what are the collaborative capacity elements that people are naming at this moment across the country? But those elements also play into, you know, how the collaborative functions. And so there are these activities that are enabled by those elements. And again, this is a summary list, but I'll give a couple examples. You know, public engagement, that's the stakeholder assessments. Those are the outreach and you know, sharing information like Rob did at the beginning of this call, at the beginning of this webinar. The meeting and convening, just the act of actually meeting on a regular basis, however that happens very differently across the country and in different situations. But that meeting and convening activity was crucial. The relationship building, That was another that kind of fed out of the participant qualities, but building the relationships that sustain the collaborative. And then we decided to separate this out, the landscape stewardship actions, the actual actions that are often what people focus on as the outcomes. Those are those stewardship hours, and those are crucial for defining what a landscape stewardship collaborative does. They're a piece of these activities, but those are anything from weed abatement activities to implementation, restoration, all of those crucial activities. But again, what we're talking about here is kind of a more holistic approach. What are the activities that go around that? And the communication and coordination of partners across the collaborative is also really crucial. The evaluation and is another piece that we'll get into as this goes. But defining self-reflection for both the internal partners and for funders or whoever needs to look at the results of the collaborative ended up being a really important part. And lastly, training and mentoring, looking ahead at succession planning, building your constituency, and also building the capacity of the staff and members of the collaborative came out as an important theme. So with those, and again, leaving context to the side for a moment, we look back at the CLSN practitioner model, and we were actually really amazed at how well it fit. We refined and adapted some of the categories that the CLSN had put together. But what you're seeing here is what we found to be the capacity elements in summary that go into, that are necessary for a functioning, successful landscape stewardship collaborative. They're ranked here, not exactly a hierarchy of needs, but we did rank them based on how often these elements were mentioned. So you're seeing coordination capacity at the bottom because it was mentioned time and time again as really crucial, a coordinator, having someone who wakes up every day and thinks about the collaborative. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail here, but this is our summary adapted practitioner model. Again, this looks like it floats a little bit in space, so I want to get back into the context. We know that where you're sitting, you are in context, and this is only relevant to the extent that it reconnects with your context. So these are these sub-themes under the context that I named. I'll go through them really quickly, but they're all so crucial to understanding how this work actually happens. The geography, the sense of place, the physical geography of how the collaborative is distributed, what the particulars of the ecosystem look like. The collaborative phase, a lot is being done in this front at the moment, but we use this sort of loose startup, building, maintaining framework, and those were just really important pieces for recognizing when and where certain elements are needed over others. The policy environment, sometimes there's a policy that's a singular driver like the ESA. Other times it's just the water you're swimming in. It's the NEPA assessments. It's all of the different policies that go into defining the work. And that often feeds into the problem statements, but that's kind of the recognition of what the driver of the collaborative is. And then lastly, I'll just kind of power dynamics and history, as you all know, just enormously important for this work. These things are coupled, there's power dynamics throughout history, but so time and again, people were mentioning that you couldn't understand where the collaborative is without understanding the history of the people and the place. So we felt like that needed to be recognized kind of aside from these elements, and it really underlies that triangle you're seeing. And we're working on maybe a visual that'll do that, but that's kind of what's under that triangle. And we had this really just compelling quote among many others that nobody does conservation on an empty stomach. And that just kind of speaks to that context, really. Sometimes to do the stewardship project that you want to do, that restoration project, you have to think as a collaborative about the food security of the community you're working in, or other issues that may not be at the front of a stewardship approach traditionally, but they're crucial to a functioning collaborative. So this is that context that underlies all of those elements, and we really hope that comes across, that we wanted to attend to that and not just pull out some abstraction that we think could apply anywhere.
Yeah, so thanks, Seamus. And I think following on to the logic model that Seamus just shared, I think with the elements and activities, also we see outcomes. And so the outcomes that you see listed here are very high level. And that's because our conversations kind of stayed a little bit abstract at times. And so I think we have some examples of these outcomes that we're going to share with you from quotes that we had from you all in just a minute. But just to go over kind of the high level versions of the outcomes that we gathered from our conversations. First and foremost, we saw that people were accomplishing their intended environmental stewardship goals. We also saw that people felt that there were improved and or increased collaborative relationships, that folks were able to leverage funding for their collaboratives and for their individual organizations. That segues into achieving individual organizational goals and specific wins for the organization that they were involved with. Also, a greater connection to the field of practice. So really building, professionalizing this field of collaborative landscape stewardship. And then lastly, an interesting finding was also the dissolution of collaboratives. So kind of the dissolving of, whether it be intentional or unintentional, dissolving of a collaborative could be an outcome of whether there's the presence of elements or non-presence of elements. And just a quick reminder, I mean, because this study was a qualitative exploratory study, we aren't directly correlating these outcomes with investments and elements. This is really just us describing the relationships between them. And we hope that this serves as a foundation potentially for future research that could connect that in a more statistically relevant or sound way. But we're really looking to just describe these relationships for this study. So that first outcome, accomplishing intended environmental stewardship goals, we felt like this quote really spoke to that. And described how really a strategic planning process helped this collaborative collectively identify areas of high conservation value. So they were able to protect over 400,000 acres as a collaborative and protect half of their entire region from development. And this just exemplifies one of the ways that, that folks were describing environmental stewardship goals. They also described restoration activities. They described being able to delist endangered species as a point of being able to work collaboratively in a larger landscape. So we felt this quote really highlighted the element of strategic planning and being able to have a governance structure to really make decisions together on a collective larger scale. We also saw the improved and or increased collaborative relationships. So in this quote really spoke to the positive relationships and buy-in, creating a special type of energy and camaraderie that really allowed the group to be successful. Other things related to this, trust came up several times, and the effort and time that is required to build trust, especially in non-traditional communities, and just really highlighting the fact that buy-in was crucial for collaborative success, and that folks felt like having strong relationships was an outcome of working together and being intentional. And then others, leveraging funding for the collaborative. We found many examples of folks talking about when they were able to demonstrate to a funder that they had a partner or multiple partners, they were able to do much more collectively, and they were able to actually get more funding, pulled all of their resources together. So this is another quote that was really wonderful. Someone had shared that they were able to identify what everyone had to give and also get $1 million grant to be able to do the work that they were interested in doing. And I loved how they said, so that was probably a success, very offhandedly. But this, there were several examples of this that we saw from our data around folks being able to really leverage funding when they pulled their resources together.
Another really interesting one was the individual organizational win. So again, we're talking about collective work, but it's really important for each of those organizations to kind of get the win that they're, their best alternative to negotiated agreement. They want to get the win that they're engaging in the collaborative for. And we thought that was worthy of note. This participant mentioned the vegetation map that met the individual needs of all those who participated in it. So that was a data sharing effort. That was kind of achieving collective goals but it also worked for the missions of each of the members of that collaborative, which is a really important part of, you know, a functional collaborative that is satisfying those needs. The connection to the field of practice is really in part recognition of this emerging field, the emerging field of landscape scale collaborative management and stewardship. And it's a complicated discussion around like the holism of the field, but also the diversity of the members. But you can see here, it's at large, this person is speaking to how collaboratives are able to foster a network mindset that's kind of contagious among the group and perhaps across geographies. And I think that's in part what we're doing here is stitching together that field of practice conceptually. But this entails things like coordination and group collective goals and evaluation activities that help speak to this storytelling of connection. And lastly here, again, this was an interesting one. We saw both intentional and unintentional stories of both unintentional and intentional dissolution of collaboratives. This person here is speaking to how the governance structure is just so key. And if that's not in place, the collaboratives will run into trouble or dissolve. At other times, it was something like training and mentoring and coordination capacity that wasn't in place, that people, you know, didn't plan for the succession of the collaborative. And at a certain point, the energy just ran out. That was more an unintentional approach. At other points, recognition of the policy environment and having a strong coordinator in place enabled them to complete the goal. And then at that point, their collective goal was no longer relevant and they were able to dissolve successfully. And so that was more of an intentional story. But we found this to be really important to note because it's just not, you know, in the nonlinear way that a lot of these things play out. Dissolution is an outcome. And again, intentional or unintentional depends in part on the context and on the elements. So yeah,
oh.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, Seamus. That was a pretty brief overview of our outcomes. We are in the process of writing our white paper right now, or actually we've written our first draft and it's in review at the moment. So we definitely go into more detail on all of those outcomes and provide more quotes and some analysis related to that in our white paper. We also add a list of recommendations in that paper. And some of those things, and Seamus, feel free to add anything that I miss here. But really, I think the crux for all three of the audiences that we're really trying to speak to in this research, we're trying to talk to funders, practitioners, as well as researchers, really suggest clarifying the value proposition of collaborative capacity and really just trying to emphasize the importance of that and being able to describe it. And I think share a shared language and terminology and being able to really impact or adopt shared language for capacity to start using in self-assessment tools and grant making. For the funder community, we really are recommending that there is greater connection to practitioners and researchers in using these capacity frameworks and potentially co-designing grant reporting requirements or evaluative tools for practitioners or for collaboratives to use. And then for researchers, really trying to continue to engage in this type of research. I think particularly exploring those outcomes, there's a myriad of other ways that we could approach this work and really understanding how those outcomes are connected to elements. Seamus, is there anything that you wanted to add on this recommendation section?
No, that's great. And I think, yeah, we want to turn this over to you all in the next bit of this hour. But we do want to share some of our next steps that are kind of advancing towards that goal of speaking to all these different communities. As Jamie mentioned, the white paper, is in progress. We're getting closer to handing it off and getting it published. And that'll be kind of the full story of this study and hopefully a really shareable and legible way. But along with that, we also want to publish this as an academic article because we think it speaks to certain academic interests and those lineages that I mentioned at the beginning, but also because I think there's a lot of value in kind of cross-pollinating the world the way we're trying to do. with that, out of that white paper as well, in the meantime, we're hoping to have kind of a 2-pager, a short shareable document that really hones in on those recommendations and implications for the practitioners and the funders. We're going to try to take a step further in the usefulness of this elements and activities and outcomes framework to design an evaluative tool that uses that shared language, provides metrics for each of the elements, using potentially multiple methods to define and describe those elements in the work that you're doing. So that's something we're going to try to take a step forward on. And then we have some other future presentations as well beyond today. We want to share this to different networks that we've engaged with and really would love your suggestions on where else you think you'd like to see this work disseminated. But again, the purpose of today is really to connect with you all and take the time before we get into these next steps to really validate, ground truth our findings and just hear if this speaks to you. So we're going to pivot into the next part of this hour. First of all, again, thank you so much for participating, and really we want to affirm that this is all about meeting you in your place, and thanks to the CLSN, the advisory team, and the participants and the landscapes that underlie our lives and work. This is abstract, but this is not disconnected from those places and the people. So we really want this to be valuable, and hopefully you see yourselves in it. And to that latter question, we have a Jamboard activity with a couple of prompting questions. I'll throw the Jamboard link in the chat here, where you can navigate to a Jamboard, which many of you have likely participated with, but it'll simply be a series of questions on a couple different slides, and you can see the instructions there for clicking through the 4 slides that we have. You'll see questions on each one, and we're just asking you to add a sticky note, which can be done from that left-hand toolbar. Type your thoughts on the question, an answer, reflection, and really, feel free to take these any way you want, but we want to see and have a way to capture your thoughts on what we've shared with you today. All the notes are anonymous. It's looking like I'm seeing you all as anonymous animals show up on this Jamboard. And we're going to just take the next 10 minutes or so to give you time to read through those questions, reflect. Again, take this however you like, but we were really excited to hear your thoughts on what we've been able to share. Anything else on that, Jamie, before we turn it over?
No, that sounds great. I think we'll take, you said about 10 to 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Great.
Seeing some really great stuff here. It's almost like we might have to do another study to collect all of the data that you're sharing with us. Feel free to keep on adding insights to this Jamboard while we're talking, and also beyond the hour. I think we want to just recognize your time and really appreciate what we're getting here, and appreciate your appreciations to where we're seeing it. I think, Jamie and I just wanted to share a couple beyond the presentation kind of aha moments, takeaways from this study. I think I can just start by saying, this kind of interdisciplinary research and work is really hard, and, appropriately minding that gap between the research and the practice and the needs of each community is really difficult, but really important. And I think I wanted to recognize our advisory team and that diverse perspectives that they brought. That really enriched our experience, both as researchers, but just I think the results speak to some of that as well. I think what comes back for me as far as a next research question is a lot of this context piece became just so important to the stories that we're seeing on the ground. And I think it's interesting to me to think about who's speaking to that context, who's doing the research, who's already telling those stories, whether it's geographers, environmental historians, community organizers, teachers and artists and coordinators. I'm really curious to see how people are telling those stories of the context, and how that affects the outcomes as well. I think I'll turn it over to Jamie to hear some of her thoughts as well.
Yeah, those are great thoughts. And I I think similarly, some of the things that I've been thinking about is just how vast the field of collaborative landscape stewardship is. When we're talking about outcomes, I think oftentimes we maybe prioritize the ecological outcomes and talk about the social outcomes, but the social outcomes feel a little bit more abstract. And I'm really interested in exploring that in further detail and really being able to describe just the wonderful communities and relational work that these collaborative partnerships really do, and really be able to amplify that work and demonstrate its value. Just in a conversation yesterday, we had someone describe or kind of ask how we can make these collaborative spaces more democratic. And I just feel like that is such a rich question. I think in overall, just really excited to continue exploring collaborative partnerships as we continue with next steps, but really just trying to make this work as useful as possible. I think we can, as researchers, can sit in a lot of the abstract, and I'm really excited for this feedback and to actually get this work into the hands of those of you doing great work on the ground or in funding the great work that happens. So just a great gratitude and appreciation for getting to learn from all of you and to engage in this process.
Yeah, and I mean, recognizing too that this work is a part of the larger community that you're all a part of, and some of your work is happening in parallel, and we see some really exciting intersections as well. So that question about where else do you want to see this? We really love to hear about, and I'm excited to read kind of where you see this work going. Any other venues, any other places that you'd like us to present, or places that you'd like us to test these findings would be very welcome.
Yeah, absolutely echo that. And as we may have said in the beginning, we've recorded this presentation. So if you're wanting to see it again, we'll be happy to share it with you, but we're definitely going to share it with others who weren't able to join today. And yeah, just hope to continue the dialogue and would love to connect again in the future.
Yeah, so next steps for us, we're going to look at take your feedback and go back to our draft. And again, you saw some of that. The white paper should be emerging in the next couple of weeks, and we'd love to keep you on the list to share that out. So you'll see some more continuing correspondences from us in the next couple of weeks. But more than that, we just want to say thank you so much for spending your time with us in the interviews for today. And we really just, I think for me personally, and all of these ways, I just have so appreciated working with you, and I'm excited to be at this point where we get to share back what we found. So thanks again.
Echo that. And we just got a question in the chat of when this research will be ripe enough for us to start making presentations and kind of own this work. And we are in review with our advisory team right now, but that white paper should be in copy editing mode starting like mid-August. So anytime after mid-August or early September, I think we can start really going on the road, if you will. So great question. We're happy to hang on for the next 5 minutes or so if folks have questions that they want to pop in the chat. Otherwise, feel free to take off and go back to your all the to-dos that you have for the day, or enjoying hopefully some cooler weather. I know some folks are definitely in hot heat right now, but take care and hope to talk to you soon.